Welcome to Reshaping History. Hello, I'm Professor David Arnold of the University of Brighton, and I'm coordinator of the 3D CoForm project. This project is co-funded by the European Commission under the 7th Framework Programme, and we have a very wide range of interdisciplinary partners spanning from Scotland to Egypt. 3D CoForm stands for 3D Collection Formation, and in this film we'll be showing you the applications of 3D documentation technologies for all stages of processing cultural heritage information. We'll be showing you examples of the applications, the challenges and the opportunities that 3D documentation offers to cultural heritage institutions. Let's take a look. So what do we mean by 3D? In 3D CoForm we mean capturing the surface of an object in 3D along with its visual properties. That is, the way that the light behaves off the surface. We can then use those 3D models for a number of different purposes. For example, as an aid to reconstruction or in printing the object out in 3D. We also use it for visually inspecting the objects on the screen and for presenting things to the public. This example here is a 3D print of the griffin head from Pisa. The griffin is an example of using 3D in the analysis of an object. The curators were interested in the relationship between the griffin and other bronze statues of the same period, both in terms of the way they were fabricated and in terms of the detailed design which was built into them. In particular, there's a lion and an eagle with very similar markings.
3D scanning was really important because these two objects are very different in shape. One it's a lion and one it's a griffin. But both of them have important, interesting carvings on the surface, chisel, made by chisel, and the idea is to try to make some comparison between these chisel in order to, again, try to find some evidence on the possible common origin.
Different arts historians come together virtually on a 3D model and they all contribute their hypothesis over, for instance, the provenance of the object. They add their annotations, they add their thoughts, and they can be shared immediately without waiting for a publication.
A statues museum in London might be connected, might share data with a statues museum in Greece. And that gives this synergy that we hope will allow cultural professionals to really derive and answer completely new questions from what we've provided data-wise.
In this area we have a number of exhibits which show the use of 3D technologies in investigating questions about cultural artifacts. For example, here we have two exhibits relating to Michelangelo. The first is of Michelangelo's David, which in fact has a number of cracks in the support to the right leg. The curators are of course interested if there's any deterioration in the statue, and so what they're trying to use the 3D technologies for here is to record this area repeatedly over a period of time to see whether there's any movements in those cracks.
The innovation was also to have at the same time a 3D scanning done on these regions and also a very dense photographic mapping done in the same regions with the best digital photographing technology that we have. And the innovative approach was to mix these two media. So not having just a 3D model from one side and photographs on the other side, but mix the media in order to be able to have in a single model all the information which is conveyed by images and by the 3D.
The second statue is the Pieta di Palestrina, which is a statue which was originally attributed to Michelangelo, but they're not sure whether or not the predominant amount of work might have been done by a pupil rather than Michelangelo himself. And so they've been trying to analyze the structure of the chisel marks on the statue to see whether or not it is in line with Michelangelo's style.
Essentially, before using this kind of technology, the art historians has to go physically close to the sculpture, take a caliper and measure each individual chisel marks, the width and the depth, and all the different measures, and try to create a map of the sculpture. But if you have this digital model, you can actually perform what we call a parametrization. That means a mapping of 3D shape on 2D plane. And so you can imagine to put a piece of paper on top of these legs and then to unfold it on a plane, and then you have an image that maps these chisel marks. So then it's easy, you can use all the image processing technique to analyze these tracks and to classify them and to make statistics, and that's much more easier and faster than measure the marks individually.
We developed the technology to do this comparison numerically, but we still have to complete the study together with the art historians, because it is not something that can be done just by computer scientists. It's a joint work of computer scientists and art historians.
The relationship between art historians and engineers, it's not common, but nevertheless, we see that lots of stuff to be done. We also see that we can actually tune technology in a way that the artists and the historians can reveal so much more than the traditional means that they have so far.
Working together is not simple, because usually art historians have a language and computer scientists have another language. So you need to teach them to understand each other. So this is a slow process which takes some years in order to become really proficient. But once you become proficient, so the computer scientists know something of the background and interest of art historians, and vice versa, you can bring really good things together.
In this exhibit, we have 3 Islamic vases which are all owned by the Louvre Museum, but came to them via different routes. The challenge here was to establish whether or not these vases had all in fact started life in the same place. Because of the glaze on these shapes and because of the damage to the different vases, the challenge is to actually work out what the underlying shape is to compare them. And so what they did in the museum was to scan the vases in and then take the color out and compare the basic underlying shape of the central section of each of the vases.
From these 3D scans, we could compare very accurately the differences between the models and determine whether they probably came from the same mold or not, and therefore whether they were manufactured through a mold process or by hand. We discovered that the differences between the 3D models were sufficiently small to say that they were made through a mold process. If they came from the same mold, then we know they came from the same place, the same workshop, probably created by the same person.
The final exhibit in this area is something that might be thought of as more of a 2D problem than a 3D, but in fact 3D has some interesting insights to shed on the problem. This portrait is of Van Dyck, a 17th century Flemish artist who was a pupil of Rubens for some of his early career. And the original suggestion was that Rubens painted this as a portrait of Van Dyck. Some recent analysis, which includes looking at the structure of the paint in the painting, has suggested that it might be a self-portrait, an early self-portrait by Van Dyck himself. And what was done in this was to analyze the 3D structure of the paintbrush strokes and so on, the way the paint was laid down. And in the same way as we use the chisel marks in the Michelangelo example, this is an example of trying to attribute the provenance and the style of the artist.
Paintings are considered to be quite flat. Yeah? But nevertheless, if you put it in a system like this, you see paint layers are really 3D. They are really there. And they can even identify something about the painter. They can identify something about the history. So the Van Dyck painting, the experiment that we did is actually part of a larger experiment where also X-rays being used in chemical analysis. But in this case, we're trying to figure out the brush strokes on the painting and see what is really there. And what was actually astonishing in this case is that you can actually see that the hat, yeah, was actually painted over a number of layers of hair. Yeah? Or the cape was actually painted over original color and shirts. So you knew by that time that there must have been another painting underneath. Yeah? Just a very simple experiment, but it revealed so much at the same time.
The V&A curatorial department of theatre and performance has a large collection of puppets, and we have a really great collection of Punch and Judy. Punch and Judy is always popular. And the curators in that department have always been asking us whether we can photograph these, because they like to make them more available to the public. Within 3D Coform, we gave them the idea, shall we do 3D? Can we try 3D of these objects? And they say, yeah, please, great. We'd love to see that and see what can be achieved.
Modelling something like this is complex because of 2 things. Firstly, the material itself, the puppet is designed to be flexible, but if you move it during digitization, then effectively it changes the shape. The second thing is the hair, which is modelled from fur. Where light is hitting something soft like that, it doesn't focus well. So actually that's quite difficult and tricky to model.
Well, in the V&A Photo Studio, we've used most of the tools in 3D Coform. The one that we've used the most is the Smart Scan from Breukman.
Okay, this scanner works with structured light, so we project fringe patterns onto the object, and we have two cameras, a stereometrical setup, and the two cameras record those images with the projected patterns, and this allows the computer to calculate high-definition 3D data.
Our involvement with Mr. Punch was to take it from the work by the V&A to capture Mr. Punch photographically and scanning-wise, to turn it into something which is capable of standing up beside the original object, which was in the display case, and on screen immediately beside it. So visually, you're at this great challenge where if it doesn't look like the object that you can see beside the screen, then you're wondering, what's the purpose of all of this? So it had to look visually very accurate, and then we had to do something with it that made the public understand more about the object. And of course, Mr. Punch is an animated glove puppet.
And so in this part of the exhibition we have a number of animations which are designed to show how the puppet would move when used for real. So for example, there's the bow and a more extravagant bow, and finally what happens when Mr. Punch hits something.
Most of people only think of 3D models to be visualized on a screen, or maybe on a 3D screen in a 3D movie or something like that. But of course you can use those data for scientific research, or you can use this for quite different applications. And one is to animate these 3D data in such a way. It was a really amazing story what they did at the V&A.
So it gives the viewer, again a virtual viewer or a visitor to the museum, an opportunity to see what the object may actually do rather than being static in a case. The surfaces that you can achieve with these scanners can be different. So for example, the multi-view dome from Bonn can give you things with surfaces that you can't achieve with other scanners.
Well, the multi-view dome is actually an integrated acquisition device which is able to capture 3D geometry of objects, but also the reflectance properties of the object surface. So it's possible to have a photorealistic representation of the object surface. There is another dome device within the project, which is a mini dome from Leuven, which is designed to be portable.
The mini dome basically is just one vertical camera, vertically mounted on top, and for the rest there are only light sources. Yeah? There's nothing else. The system works quite well for objects where we're trying to reveal these very tiny details, and that can range from a variety kind of objects. So we have been testing with cuneiforms, with coins, medallions.
Coins are the typical artworks which are in the museums, are very difficult to read, they are very difficult to perceive, have a story behind and nobody knows it. So we have considered them as the ideal artwork to be presented in a different manner.
So I think that's the key thing, is the story of the object. That's what a museum's for. It's there to give the visitors to the museum an impression what the object was, what it did, what it was for. That's only enhanced in 3D.
In this area of the exhibition we have a number of objects and exhibits which are relating 3D to the restoration and reconstruction of cultural artifacts. This example is of the Madonna di Pietranco, which is a statue which was destroyed in the Abruzzo earthquake.
Previously, restoration of certain objects which have been broken or fragmented was very complicated, requiring manual process of putting the objects together, testing each position out, which was very time-consuming, error-prone. With 3D technology and with 3D Coform, we can now virtually restore an object and have an idea of what an object will look like after restoration before physically doing it.
We can measure and we can process things, we can plan our restoration, so the restorers can actually look at different ways of restoring things without having to try it out on the physical object.
And this example is of the Bronze Age boat, the Kazafani boat from the island of Cyprus. This was discovered in the 1960s in a grave and was reconstructed using the techniques of the day. They wanted to show this boat as part of an exhibition about Cyprus in the Smithsonian in Washington. And they didn't feel that the original was strong enough to be moved. So Cyprus Institute did a virtual reconstruction of it, and in conjunction with the curators, produced the right paints and so on to give a proper impression of the original. And that was what was used in the exhibition in the Smithsonian. This final example, though, is one that we produced locally in Brighton because we were unable to get access to the Smithsonian copy. And this is now being printed out in 3D using the rapid prototyping facilities of the University of Brighton in the Department of Engineering. And then a fine arts student from the Faculty of Arts painted it as near as we could get to the colors of the original. And that's what's on show here.
The great vision behind this is to create the digital replica, the 3D replica. We speak of a digital master model that would be able to act as a substitute in many ways to real museum artifacts.
Because you can manipulate both the physical replica, but above all the 3D model, and study it in a way which is not safe with the original object, because you can break it if you want and see how it looks like, or manipulate easily and enlarge it and analyze in any possible way. So it's much safer and much easier to study the boat as any other object operating on a virtual replica and not on the original object. And it can be done remotely. You can stay in Brighton and study the object in Cyprus, and then decide that you want to look at something similar elsewhere, and you can do it easily.
So we see ourselves as the data infrastructure for many museums to share their data, to have synergies. For instance, when a museum wants to make an exhibition, they might have one piece, one helmet of a specific kind. So it might be worthwhile to actually put next to an existing artifact in a museum exhibition a large screen showing lots of different but similar helmets from the same periods residing physically in different museums.
I see no reason why we should not have a virtual V&A on museum websites. What could even be more exciting is if we make all those object models available to the public. They make their own exhibitions, their own virtual exhibitions, compile them, curate them themselves.
In this last exhibit, we have a reconstruction of the temples at Abu Simbel. These temples were due to be flooded by the building of the Aswan Dam in Egypt. What we did here was to take the historic photographs which were used to document the site in the 1950s and use those as the basis for doing a reconstruction, both of the internal chambers of the temple and of the external areas.
So working purely from the photography, we have been able to reassemble the walls and 3D sculptures inside the temples remarkably accurately and put those textures back onto the walls. And the result of that is that we have an immersive experience of being at the temple as it was, in a way as a pre-tourist antiquity.
This draws on two interesting features. One is the use of historic imagery to do 3D reconstructions now. And this, from our point of view, adds a whole new area of possibility to the use of historic collections of photographs. The second, which we have yet to undertake completely, is the use of tourist imagery as a means of doing the reconstruction on the exterior areas.
There's a resource, massive resource out there, which we will no doubt plunder in years to come.
We certainly hope that people will use this technology in the future. So we think it's very valuable for cultural heritage, for acquiring objects which can then be disseminated, for example. But we also would like to see people using it for, we can imagine all kinds of commercial purposes as well.
I think the future will see us using this technology more as a routine aid for analysis and for restoration, and also for outreach to the public, to allow the public access, and also other researchers and in other institutions to have access to these objects without having to transport them and without having to manipulate them physically.
And what we do hope is that we have created the momentum through our collaboration with various partners in the cultural heritage sector so that our software will actually survive. We have invested quite a lot of efforts, maybe beyond the typical research project, to make it sustainable, to make it long-lasting, because we actually believe in that kind of approach. So even if our software would die, somebody else would have to create the same software, because we believe this is actually a way to go.
Thank you.